It is Monday, October 16th, 2017. My name is Ashton Ellett. I'm here with Bob Shaw here in Sandy Springs, Georgia for another installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw, for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Really do appreciate it. Just to begin with, tell us a bit about your childhood and your upbringing, how you got to be who you are today.
I was born in South Georgia, in Brownwood, Georgia, Terrell County, about 7 miles from Dawson, in August of 1929. My father was a one-legged sharecropper who also had taught himself to be a mechanic. So he set up a garage to try to take care of some of the machines that the farmers had. And we were doing well when I was born, my mother tells me. They had several cars and was doing fine, but as it progressed, it got to the way the farmers couldn't pay, so we lost everything. So my uncles were in Marietta, Georgia, north of Atlanta, working with Brumby Chair Company. And they were able to get my father a job there as a truck driver. Now this was driving 18-wheelers, and he had his left leg 6 inches below his hip. He had an artificial leg, and he had to travel the Southeast delivering that furniture, and not only delivering it, but taking it off the truck. And he was over 6 feet, very strong. But he did that, and they learned what a great mechanic he was. Took him off the road, and he became their mechanic till he retired in 1950. Well, I came along in Marietta, and he wanted me to follow in his footsteps. The last thing I wanted to be was an automobile mechanic or an electrician. So even though I had to work with him as a teenager, I had another friend who was a professor at Georgia Tech that was kind of like a second father, and he showed me the possibilities in life, and I decided I wanted to be like him and be an accountant. So I started at Georgia Tech in 1947, and I was always in athletics, so I played baseball there in 47. But as luck would have it, I wasn't studying much. I ended up in night school, and I couldn't get out. So my athletic days were over, so I moved down to the Atlanta division of the University of Georgia, which is now Georgia State. And I started on a degree, and I was going to be a CPA and let that be my field of activity. But I had joined the Georgia Air National Guard in 1948. In order to beat the draft. So when the Korean War broke out in August, our outfit was the first one called active duty. So my wife and I had been dating seriously. So I was activated October the 18th, 1950, and then shipped out to California. Well, I realized that I was going to be shipped overseas. My wife was the most beautiful model in the world. I knew that while I was gone, there was about already 5 guys trying to win her away from me. And so I pushed her. We got married Christmas night, 1950. And then we moved to California to set up our housekeeping. And sure enough, I was sent to Japan, to Misawa, Japan, in the northern end of the Honshu Island during the Korean War. I was the sergeant major for an Air Force hospital. And I stayed there until I was discharged and sent home in May 1952. And when I got back, I went back into the singing business, the Southern gospel singing business with the Homeland Harmony Quartet. Went back on the road and was doing nicely. We started with our house, our car, and we finally were able to have our first daughter in 1954. And then as I traveled with the quartet so much and leaving Elaine and the baby, I realized this is not a life for me. So I came off the road and went with Mutual of New York and life insurance. And I followed that for 3 years with them. Then I went into insurance management with New England Life and stayed with them 3 years. And then Pan American Life out of New Orleans offered me the general agency here in Georgia for them. So in 1960, I joined them and kept in that field until I left them, I guess, in 1975. But during the time I was in the insurance business, I begun to notice the government's involvement in small business. I was a history nut, and I realized the different parties and things that had gone on for years in the country, but had never gotten down into the politics, determining which party I really wanted to be active in. But then as I begun to see how the Republicans acted toward people, it seemed to me that they felt, take what you got and use it, and nobody's going to stop you. Go as far as your talents will take you. And on the other hand, it appeared to me that the Democrats were saying, now wait a minute, it's all right for you to get ahead, but you shouldn't get too far ahead of this guy over here. Now, he's not trying as hard as you do, or he doesn't want to move, but we need to put this little barricade in front of you so we can slow you down and he can keep up with you. Their philosophy was that if it's good enough for the group, it's good enough for you. That was not the way I thought.
Did you make a distinction between the National Democratic Party up in Washington versus, say, the Georgia Democrats, the Dick Russells, the Herman Talmadges, the governor at the time would have been Ernest Vandiver. Did you see the distinction between those Democrats?
I did, because at that time we didn't have a party strong enough for me to compare. I was comparing this nationally.
Okay.
But I decided to become a Republican, and I went downtown and I tried in 1960 to get involved in the party. I wanted to back Nixon, and I went down to find where the headquarters was, get literature, work for him, and become a member of the party. Well, they gave me plenty of literature. I took it back, and I carried my precinct in Northwest Atlanta highly for Nixon, which was something that hadn't happened before. And as soon as that election was over, the city elections began, and we had three people that were very active in the Republican Party. Rodney Cook. Then we had a judge, Richard Freeman, and then a real estate man named Williams. And they were trying hard to get a party started along with Randolph Thrower and others. And Rodney talked with me about backing him during a city race and got me in the party. And from there, it just seemed like, I guess I may have been trying harder, but I begun to move up in ranks, and by getting party and precinct offices. By 64, I tried to run for the state senate. I was running with Goldwater, and my opponent was Horace Ward, who was a young black man that had helped integrate the University of Georgia Law School. And we ran, and we were very close friends during the race, but he won. The district was about 50-50 white and black. Well, the blacks just turned out galore to make sure that Goldwater didn't win, that Johnson did.
Right.
So Horace beat me in that election, but then I stayed in, and the next thing I know, in 1966, I became the first vice chairman of the county party, while Earl Patton was chairman. Then in 68, he stepped out, and I was elected chairman. Re-elected again in 1970, but also in 1970, Paul Jones and the other party officials at that time, Wiley Wasden, Roy Foster Jr., talked me into running for first vice chairman. So I did. In 1960, there was quite a party rivalry. They had gotten upset with Bo Callaway for not going along with Oliver Bateman for governor.
This is 1970?
In 70.
Okay.
And they were bound and determined to get Bo. And then when Oliver backed out, Hal Suit, a newsman, came on, and he was the candidate. Well, they were backing him, and Jimmy Bentley was a Democrat who switched parties along with 4 other Democrat elected officials, and he was going to run for governor. Well, Bo was going to support him, so did I. But then when he, as it turned out, they lost, both lost, but the party acquired a debt of about $40,000 that the the state chairman had signed up for. And so I had to take that debt over. And Wiley got mad and quit in early 71. I was elected to take his place. So then I started and served 3 terms as a state chairman. During that time, one of the first things I noticed was that the chairman was elected just a few months before the primary, the general election. And I said, this is not right. There's no way a chairman can be elected and organize the party and get anything going for the general election candidate in just that few months. He ought to be elected in off-election years. So I got the party to change it, but nobody would run because nobody wanted to run a 1-year term, and I said I would. So I served my term, then a 1-year term, and then another 2-year term. And that's the reason we do it that way now. But that got me started in the race for 70, 72, and so forth.
Well, let me take a step back and really dig into your early days in Atlanta politics, or Fulton County politics, as it were. You sort of post-date the early big wheels, the Harry Summerses and the Elbert Tuttles. But what can you recall about sort of the powers that be at the time in the 1950s and 1960s, like Bob Snodgrass and individuals like that from the so-called Atlanta faction of the party?
I didn't know them well. I got to know them. They were good friends with Roscoe Pickett, who was kind of one of the ringleaders at the time, and they were opposing the Atlanta group, where Randolph Thrower and Alex Beeler was one of the leaders, and Rodney Cook, others, but they came in. They were the people who actually organized the party to where it later became the dominant party. Back then, in the early 70s, the only thing we had was organizations around the metropolitan area. As a matter of fact, in 1970, I was still first vice chairman, but Wiley had gone out of the state. His father had left him a bunch of money, and he had bought a fishing interest in Peru, and he was worried about it, so he was there. So he left me, and I was the acting chairman of the party. Well, Oliver Bateman, Judge Deputy Tanksley, and Jimmy Bentley all came on the scene to run for elected office for governor. The oddity of that race was all 3 of them were crippled. That was a standard joke, but I remember interviewing each one of them as we talked about it. And I said, now you realize the problems you face. I said, we've only got organizations that you can speak of in 21, maybe 22 counties out of 159. So the first thing you got to do is run against one another in these counties and win the primary. And the minute you do, you've got to tackle the other 159 counties, most of them rural, which you have no experience in. Then you've got to try to win in order to beat the Democrat. And they had a fierce battle between them. Al Suit was the one who won the primary at that time, and then we were unable to win the general election. Got wiped out in the general election, as we usually did. But the way these people handled the party.
Pause it.
Mm-hmm. The way the leaders who were coming on, the Roscoe Pickett crowd, got with the Washington crowd and realized that if we were going to win, we had to go with the national candidate in a big way, and we had to organize the state. Mm-hmm. So they got groups together right after the 60 election, and by 1962, they were working precincts all over the state to organize so that when we came up in 1964 for our conventions, then they could win the offices in each precinct level. Then we went to the state convention. They controlled the state convention. And by that time, everything was totally Goldwater. They came in and wiped out the downtown group. Because
was this? Were you involved in that effort here in Fulton County?
No, I was still part of the group following Randolph Thrower. I wasn't necessarily supporting anybody at the time. Now, as it turned out, in 1964, we begun to talk, and a number of them begun to talk to me about running for the state senate. So I did. Dan McIntyre had won his Senate seat in 62, and he was running again in the neighboring community. So I ran. So I ran with Goldwater. But in town, you know, the Democrats were still winning. Out in the state, Goldwater was winning, and he won the state.
So other than Roscoe Pickett, who were some of the, I guess we'll call them the more conservative element of the Republicans that sort of came in and wiped out that Atlanta faction, that downtown crowd that you mentioned?
The chairman, the senator from Savannah,
Joe Tribble.
Paul Jones, Wiley Wasden, Roy Foster Jr., many of them over the state. Then we had a lot of them in DeKalb County. DeKalb County had a lot more conservatives than we did in Fulton. We had a number of conservatives in South Fulton, but they were not as well organized as they later became. So we got shot down in Fulton County in that race in 64.
Mm-hmm. Some of the names, going back doing research, Bill Dowda, Dr. Dowda.
Bill Dowda was, he was the one that when they had finally talked to me in running, and was my campaign manager when I ran for the Senate in 64. He was from Cobb County, good man, hard-headed, but he was driven. He worked all the time. Just a little side note, in 1969, I thought I had the possibilities of some stomach problems, and Dowder was my doctor, and he put me in the hospital. And I was laying there one night about 12 o'clock, and the door pushed open, and I became wide awake. And Bill said, "Bob Shaw, are you going to run for re-election as chairman of the Fulton County Republican Party?" I said, well, yes, I am. He said, "Well, I'm your doctor, and I'm going to challenge you." And he did. He put up a fierce fight, but he didn't care. When he felt like he wanted to move, he'd challenge his wife, I guess, if he wanted to. But he was real driven, and he stayed in that area, and he did a lot to influence the medical society, not only in Fulton but in the state. But he was a very good man.
And some of the other individuals with the Fulton County Goldwater draft Goldwater, Ed Noble.
Ed Noble, yes, he was one of the ones who put together Lenox Square, which is our first big marketing venture here. Ed Noble was real big, and it followed him, and later became real big with Reagan, and went to Washington working for Reagan, as did Frank.
Julian LaCroix, the son of the old Atlanta mayor.
The old Atlanta mayor, Colonel Roy LaCroix, he was the executive officer of the Air Force unit that I was in that went to Japan. The colonel and I worked together very much because he was a real Christian and I was, and we actually did some lay work in Japan while we were there. But Julian was and is a fantastic man, and he later became the first vice chairman of the county party, but he was very active for Goldwater.
Whitney O'Keefe.
Whitney was a banker, and he was very strong in that. He was closely associated with Roscoe Pickett, and he was serving with the bank here, and they later transferred him to Savannah, and he became one of the real party leaders down there.
What did Goldwater's his nomination mean for the trajectory of the Georgia Republican Party?
Up for that time, we didn't seem to be engrossed enough in the platform, in being part of the party at all. We were, to me, just in existence. But when Goldwater came along, and the conservative he was, and the books he wrote, all of a sudden the party begun to take notice of platform items and how important they were, and begun to put together platforms, and they would fight you in a minute over those items. But we learned a lot. We grew, and from there, for years, even in the 1970s, during the time I was state chairman, I served as state chairman, and then I was also vice chairman of the Republican National Committee while George H.W. Bush was chairman. We were still in those times when people were still coming along running for office saying, I'm a Goldwater Republican, like they do Reagan now. They use Reagan's name. Back then, up to Reagan, they used Goldwater's name. That was a distinction. If you were Goldwater, okay, that was, you got the ribbon on your shoulder. So it was that important to latch on to him.
As opposed to a Rockefeller Republican?
To anybody else, because nobody else coming on was going to be as conservative as he.
So in 1964, Goldwater's coattails helped pull Bo Callaway into Congress, Georgia's first Republican congressman since Reconstruction. What do you remember about Bo Callaway in those early days?
When he was running for governor, I didn't remember that much about him. I didn't really get to know him until he was running for office, and at that time I was first vice chairman of the county party, and the Earl Patton was handling one end, and I was pretty much handling all looking for candidates and talking people into signing up and making our party work with the candidates. And I would be the one that would go out with Bo, and we could get him out. I remember taking him to one mill village. I knew that he was from the mill area and thought he'd be great. Well, we got there none too early, so we could shake hands with a lot of them, stand around smoking. Got there just in time. The minute was over, took off again. I didn't think I thought, now listen, I came up a blue collar. I was not from his generation. When we came up, I told you about my father. We were the family that I knew what it was like to wear clothes, and I was the third recipient. And I remember getting in front of the floor, in front of the fire, and my father half-soling my shoes, didn't go to the shoe shop, and things of that nature. I didn't come up from the moneyed section like Bo did. But when we were talking, and Rodney Cook and I got him off before he made his big speech at Hurt Park, downtown Atlanta, when he was running against Lester. And Rodney and I said, now, Bo, you've got to win Atlanta. You got to win all of this metropolitan Atlanta. When you're speaking, tell them you want to be the governor for all of the people, not try to separate folks into conservatives, liberals, and so forth, white or black. You want to be governor for all the people. We thought we drove it home. And then we got back out in the crowd, and he got up and made his speech. Went just the opposite. When he got through, we knew there wasn't a chance he was going to win Fulton County. But he came close, and then after that, then he became the national committee man for the party. Matter of fact, when I was chairman, he was my national committee man till he became the Secretary of the Army. We were pushing for his get with Nixon to elect him to that, and he did. And so we worked together real well. He grew into being a good party man. When he came on board, he was stiff. This was new, and he didn't know how to work with a blue collar, but he learned. He was a good man, and I was glad that I could go. Just before he died, Harry Geisinger, a state representative, and Mike Egan, who had also been a state rep and a senator, and went along, and me and Fletcher Thompson, who's an old congressman, and another fellow went with us, and we arranged to go down and see Bo, but he had had his stroke, and he was living having around-the-clock people with him. And we talked then, and he was telling them how he worked with me. And I don't know that he always was as congenial following me as he made like he was then, but we were talking real well, and he wanted us to get together again, and we planned to, but he died before we could get back down and get with him. But he grew into the position. If he could still live longer, he'd have been a great asset.
What would it have meant to the party had he won the popular vote, but if he had been able to become a Republican governor in 66, 67?
Well, let me tell you the reason why the state legislature elected Lester Maddox. Most of the guys that was in the House and the Senate were close to Bo. They had all come up along with him, and they liked him. He would be the one they would wanted for governor. But when they were all talking, they said, now listen, we've got a patronage problem here. If we go and vote for Bo and he goes in, there's going to be 3,300 Democrats around this state going to lose their jobs in a month's time, and they're going to be replaced by the Republicans. And then the folks are going to turn against us, and they're going to kick us out next time. So for their own existence and because of the patronage, they held their nose and voted for Lester. But that's what it would have meant for the Republican Party. We would have become an organization. Our people would have been put in. Our thoughts and our ideas would have captivated the state government, and all of a sudden they would have begun to see the things that we were doing. Now, that's not too foreign from what they were seeing, because back then many of the Democrats were the real conservatives. You know, the Herman Talmadges and so forth, and the Ernest Vandiver. Well, I can't say it. Ernie Vandiver was a good friend, and I liked him, but he was the one. Just a side note: when Martin Luther King and his father were arrested, went to jail, Bobby Kennedy and Jack got on the phone and called Ernie Vandiver and said, "Look, you've got to go get him out. You don't let him stay in jail overnight. Get him out right away." Well, Nixon could have done the same thing, but he dilly-dallied around, and Ernie got him out. They were Republicans. They had always voted Republicans. And all of our biggest votes were the blacks in this area. The National Committee man to the party, for the Republican Party, was the grandfather of where's my mind? Our great big fat mayor.
Maynard Jackson.
Maynard Jackson. Maynard Jackson.
John Wesley Dobbs.
Yeah, he was the National Committee man, and they were the ones that were actually the power of the party up until the 1960s, and when they switched and went with the Kennedys, and it was because of their fast movement and Ernie getting them out of jail. But they were the conservative element. When in '68, when the 5 elected officials left the Democrat convention in Chicago and came to the party, Jimmy Bentley was one of them, and our Secretary of Agriculture,
Phil Campbell.
Yeah, Phil Campbell, who always wanted to run for governor and talked to me about it quite a bit, and Alpha Fowler, who was a great friend and a banker that I got to know in Douglasville. All of them were as conservative as you get, maybe more conservative than our people now. So I don't know if we'd won in '66. I don't know how much we would have changed in the way of conservatism. They would. It's hard for me to describe. That blows my mind to think what we'd have done if we'd have won in '66. We were trying hard enough.
Well, 2 people who did win, and you've already mentioned one, Fletcher Thompson here in the old fifth district, and Ben Blackburn in the 4th. Tell me about how Thompson and Blackburn were able to defeat their Democratic opponents.
Bill Dowda was, I think, the 5th district chairman, but at any rate, I was selected to be the guy to help get candidates, and Dowda and them laid it on me. I'd run in '64. They laid it on me to run against Charles Weltner, the sitting congressman from the 5th district, and I hadn't really got over the loss that I had in '64. It's still costly, and I didn't feel like taking on that burden. So I then took on the job of trying to find the candidate, Well, Fletcher had run and won his Senate seat in South Fulton. So I called him and we started to talking to him. And at the last minute, we were able to talk him into running. Well, that was going to be a good race between he and Weltner. Weltner was as popular as he could be and had great relationships even back to the beginning of the state of Georgia. And we were wondering how the race was going to go. But then when Lester Maddox won the primary, he said, I won't serve with it. And he resigned. Well, when he did, they came up with one of the county commissioners to run against Fletcher, but he didn't have time to raise any money or get a campaign going, so Fletcher beat him, and which was the real oddity for us. Now, it wasn't that bad out in DeKalb because Ben, they had a lot of conservatives over there. South Fulton was full of conservatives, and they ran a close race. And I remember going to the courthouse and help counting the votes when we had a runoff, and he won by a few votes. But those two came on board, and they became very, very popular. And Fletcher decided in '72. Dick Russell had died, and he thought, well, now I can run for his seat and take that Senate seat. Well, we were growing, and by this time I was the state chairman, and I knew that I still needed he and Ben, and we had other candidates that we were pulling in to run in '74, and I didn't want him to run for the Senate. I didn't think he could win the Senate seat. And I went to Jerry Ford, who was the minority leader in the House, and I said, Jerry, I need these two guys. I don't need them out. He said, you're right. So he went to Fletcher, and he tried to talk Fletcher out of running for the Senate, but he couldn't. Fletcher was hard-headed, so he decided he was going to run. Well, they had kind of reapportioned the district, and Andrew Young ran. So in Fletcher's place, we put Rodney Cook. Mm-hmm. And Rodney and Andrew ran. Well, Rodney had lost the mayor's race earlier, but he was well liked, and he was in the state legislature and as well as city council. We thought he had a good chance, but Andrew Young won that race, and Ben went ahead and ran, but then he got beat in '66 when they decided that they were going to, in '76, they decided they were going to the public was going to give us a spanking for Watergate. So they just kicked everybody out. So we had nobody left. Newt was running. I had recruited Newt to become involved in state party, and Bo and I had put him to work traveling the state, doing position papers for us and helping us. And I'd made Newt chairman of several committees, and then signed him up to run in '74, and then in '76 he ran again, but he was running against Jack Flint. Jack Flint was a great representative, and he had as many friends that were Republicans as he did Democrats, and they were not always supporting Newt. Back then, Newt was not the conservative. If I could show you pictures of him with that black hair going everywhere and those big horn-rimmed glasses, and liberal as could be, and out campaigning with these crewmen that he would bring in from Rockefeller in New York, and all of our people said, those guys are talking, they can't win. We don't even want them around. Tell Newt to get out or get rid of them. Well, even our party people were not going solely for Newt then. But then when Jack got out in '76, then the next election, Newt was able to win. But when you had those guys, it was as well trenched as anyway. They were getting Republican support as much as they were Democrat. So that was we were able then to come back and start winning some election. and we were able to regain the 4th district again with Pat Swindle, and so little by little we begun to pick up more and more people. But that's enough of that story, I guess.
So in '68, you finally become Fulton County chairman.
Fulton County chairman.
That was the same year as Nixon's second presidential campaign.
Yeah.
Tell me about, first, the differences in sort of the political culture of Fulton County. Fulton County is a big county, a very diverse county in terms of ideology. What were the different brands of republicanism, if that's the right term? But the differences between like South Fulton County, where Fletcher Thompson was from, Buckhead, where there were lots of old, sort of the in-town or downtown crowd, as you mentioned, or really rural North Fulton County, which was pretty rural back in those days.
That takes some thinking. I'm going to have to think on that one before I answer that one. We'll come back to that if we will.
Sure. So tell me about Nixon's presidential campaign. That was sort of the three-way campaign back in '68 between Hubert Humphrey, Richard Nixon, and then obviously George Wallace was the American Independent candidate. What was your assessment of the '68 race here in Georgia?
Well, I liked Nixon because I had really become a follower of his when he ran in 1960, and felt like he should have won then. When he was running, he had the same conservative message that Goldwater had used in '64. As a matter of fact, I remember him coming to Georgia to speak for Goldwater once, and then he came back. He was very popular in Georgia, and he kind of took over where Goldwater left over. He picked this crowd up. Well, Hubert Humphrey was well liked with the Democrats up north, but never down here. As a matter of fact, there are even stories that Johnson didn't want him to be president. That President's Club book that was written, he was on the phone with Nixon trying to figure out how he could he wanted the story of Johnson to look good. He didn't want to be blamed for Vietnam and other things, and he didn't want to be blamed for Hubert Humphrey. So he was going to support Nixon and not Hubert Humphrey. Now, George Wallace was another matter. The people who were ultra-conservative were going to back him, and did. But there were more of the moderate conservatives backing Nixon to give him the majority as opposed to the three. Now, after Wallace was shot, then that took him out of the picture altogether when it came up in the future elections.
Richard Nixon, as you mentioned, he had sort of moved or evolved in terms of his conservatism from 1960 to 1968. How much of that do you attribute to people like Harry Dent from South Carolina, who was a very close aide and protege of Strom Thurmond's? Can you talk about Harry Dent and sort of the role of the South in Nixon's
Harry Dent
White
was
House?
the former chairman of the South Carolina Party and worked closely with the senator. And he had many young men that he kind of grew, that followed him. But he had the Southern conservative. He even wrote a book about it, about the Southern conservative movement, that it was the way the Republicans got started was through conservatism, and it was growing in the South where they became the strongest of any. So he was already very popular when Nixon wisely brought him into the White House and set him up to placate to the South, and Harry was continuing to influence people. They believed in Harry. Clark Reed was chairman of the chairman. We had the Southern Republican Chairman Group, which I was a part of, and then of course we were part of the National Committee, and I was elected the vice chairman of the South. So Harry and I were representing the South, working constantly with Harry, and we loved him. We got along just like family, and he took care of us too. And Harry led us more. Harry was not a conniver. He was not like any of the politicians you saw. He was a real born-again Christian, as I am. And we got along great because he liked my singing, and we'd get together when we was up there and have a lot of good times. But Harry was the one that was responsible for really making the party go along with Nixon. Now, Nixon would do things that folks didn't like, but because of Harry, they'd stuck with him. There was even a time, now Harry was very close to him. I know that years later, the governor of Texas, John Connally, who'd been made Secretary of the Treasury, he was close to Nixon, and Nixon had decided this is the man that ought to be president. And Harry drove that into my head. And in 1980, when he ran, my wife was, not me, but I was backing her. She was named the chairman of his committee in Fulton County. But we backed Conley because Harry had said, that's who the chief thinks we ought to go with. So that was in the family. We went with him. Then later came on and became a good friend with Reagan, but that was the way it was. Harry was just a magnet, and he could draw people to him, and he didn't pull any shenanigans that would embarrass you or anybody. Everything was always on the up and up, and if Harry said it, you could count on it. So we grew the party and became stronger in the South because of what Harry was doing for Nixon.
Now, you mentioned it earlier, Rodney Cook's mayoral race, ostensibly a nonpartisan campaign. How involved were Republicans or the Republican Party in trying to promote or support Rodney Cook's campaign against Sam Massell?
Well, they were behind him as much as they could be. Now, a lot of the people that were the staunchest Republicans were living in Fulton County, but in East Point, in College Park, they couldn't vote for him.
Right.
And Sam Massell was big with the Democrats, and also his family was great in real estate and in developing and so forth, and this gave him a lot of influence.
Sure.
Then by this time, the blacks had gone to the Democrat Party. You could always count on them going with the Democrat candidate. So he was able to beat Rodney. It was interesting though that after Sam served and came along, he was Maynard Jackson was vice mayor, and Maynard later wanted to run for mayor, and he didn't know how well he'd be accepted, and he got the feeling that the Democrat hierarchy was going to block him out and go with Sam Massell, and he asked me to come over to his law office and talk with him, and I got Dr. Robert Wright, a black optometrist. He was on the city council in Columbus to go with me because I knew it wouldn't be good to just have me. It needed a witness, so we went over and talked to him. And what Maynard wanted to know was, would I be welcome in the Republican Party? He said, my grandfather, he said, I'm the only Democrat in my party. Everybody else has always voted Republican. And we tried to make him realize how well he'd be accepted in the party. As it turned out, right at the last minute, he didn't, and he went ahead and won anyway. So, but Maynard was even willing to come back to the party at that time if he could win.
You're working in the party here in Fulton County, but at the state level, G. Paul Jones is the chairman, a Macon Republican. What do you remember about Paul Jones?
Paul was a very good man. I really liked him. Paul was a tech graduate. He was in a business in Macon that his father had started, in the concrete business, and hardworking. But he'd been in the state legislature too, and at one time he wanted to run for Congress. But he was from Macon. That put him in the center of the state, so he was closer to the rural areas. Fulton never got close to the rural areas, so we were never able to pull in all of the support that Paul could pull in. And when Paul and them decided that they wanted to start taking over, then they decided, okay, the senator from Savannah will be the chairman, Paul will be the vice chairman, Wiley Wasden from down in Savannah would be part of it, and they started to picking people from over the state that could join them, and Paul was able to pull in a lot more support than anybody else, and he was as popular as anybody. He was chairman when I became chairman, and I learned a lot from him. And but he was and Wiley was kind of one of his followers.
Okay.
And that's the reason why when Paul backed out, Wiley was elected to take his place.
Was he sort of a hand-picked, I don't want to say anointed, but sort of a hand-picked successor for Jones? Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned earlier that there was some controversy around, I guess we were talking about this before the camera was on, some controversy surrounding Wiley Wasden's term. He was only chairman briefly from about 69, 70, 71.
70. 70, and he got out in early 71. What happened was Paul Jones and the folks who were running the party had wanted our gubernatorial candidate to be Senator Oliver Bateman, who was from Macon, mm-hmm. and he and his father had a great, very large peach business, and he was a great man. I loved him to death, but they wanted to run him for governor, but at that time we had a number of people that were interested in it, and it turned out Bo and I felt our best chance was with Jimmy Bentley. Jimmy Bentley was kind of taken in by the Talmadge family and kind of treated like the baby boy in the family. And he was talking to us, and he had been he had been the treasurer of the state, and he had been real involved and had name recognition, mm-hmm. and it looked like he could step in, and instead of having to raise millions of dollars to get people to know him, the minute he comes in, they know him, and he announces as a Republican, it takes all the headlines, and you're in business. More so than with Oliver. So not because of personalities, but because of the fact that we could win, and the philosophy of both of them were conservative. So we were getting the same thing, but we just felt Jimmy would be the one to win. Well, as it turned out, Jimmy didn't win, and Oliver backed out after he saw the split. So when the race came up, we had three candidates running for governor in 1970. We had Al Suit, who was had been the news anchor in Albany, Georgia, on TV before he came to Atlanta.
WSB.
And we had Judge Jephthah Tanksley, who was from here, who had lost 2 legs and an arm in the war, World War II, and then we had Jephthah Tanksley and Bentley, who had a bad leg. So we were always characterized as the party with the crippled candidates. But they decided at the time they were not going to go with Jimmy Bentley. So they were going to back Hal Suit.
Was that pure? If you go back and you look at Hal Suit's positions or his rhetoric, he's not a liberal or necessarily moderate. But if you were looking at the two, Jimmy Bentley versus, and we'll set aside Judge Tanksley. Jimmy Bentley seems to be the more the conservative, the very staunch strong in terms of rhetoric on the issues that were important, law and order, sort of anti-drugs. He was very conservative. How was it that Hal Suit, of all people, were able to defeat a conservative, well-known politician like Jimmy Bentley?
I told you before that I was, at that time, I got with the different candidates for governor and explained to them, this is what you're going to face. There's 159 counties in Georgia, and we've got recognized organizations in 21 counties. So there are 3 of you running. You got to spend your time and your money in winning that primary, or it's all over for you. But after you win that primary, then you got a few weeks between that and the general election to try to go out and win the other 159 counties, and it's almost impossible. Well, Jimmy, instead of coming in and start running in the 21 counties where he could have been strong, Jimmy started a statewide campaign. Wow. And I told him, I said, the way you win is you go down to the county level, meet the county chairman, meet the precinct officers, get the party people behind you, and let them go out and win you, the people to back you. But Jimmy didn't do that. He did just exactly what I said not to do. And his campaign manager later told me, said, we goofed. But Jimmy lost that one. Well, Jep was a sweet guy. His son became a senator from Cobb County, and but Jep was a great guy, but he didn't have the wherewithal to put it together. So Hal won because he had their support. Now, they didn't have any idea that Hal could win statewide. They were going to go ahead and try to get him elected. But they had one thing in mind: get Bo Callaway. Get Bo Callaway. Bo was behind Jimmy Bentley. We're going to get Bo Callaway and put a stop to him. And that was the reason they went with Hal Suit. They went ahead, they put the party $40,000 in debt. That was a fortune back then. And when I was elected to replace Wiley, that was the first thing I was told by Trust Company of Georgia. Oh, by the way, you have to come down and endorse this note because it's the parties and the chairman has to endorse it.
Well, that's sort of a natural segue into my next question. What was the state of the party when you became chairman in, I guess it would have been early, maybe spring 71?
Yeah, in 71. It was February of 71. It was, we were doing well. We were growing. We had, we still had a lot of hope and a lot going for us. Nixon was still very, very popular.
Right.
And we were building off of that. Nixon was popular, and even more popular was Agnew. He was, man, he could just captivate any audience. So with those two running, and with Harry in the White House, and all of our other people in there that we love so much, we just realized that we could make it go. We were headed for real victory, and I was trying to do my best to get all of these candidates for Congress and in local office and run along with Nixon in '74. That was going to be
72?
Huh?
It was 72 with Nixon's reelection in 72 against McGovern.
Nixon was, yes, we were going to win.
Okay.
We were going to win our election in '74.
Okay.
But as it turned out, Watergate came along, and with Watergate, that killed our races. We had 5 candidates for governor in '74, but we were already wiped out from the very beginning. The public blamed us. The media begun to say the Republicans, and we took the blame for it, and they wiped us out. And it took a good long while to regain it.
Since you brought up 74 in the governor's race, Ronnie Thompson. How was Ronnie Thompson able to win the Republican nomination for governor when just 4 years before you had sort of a very urbane, very soft, not necessarily soft-spoken, but a restrained candidate in House suit. Before that, Bo Callaway, very,
Ronnie Thompson was another gospel singer and promoter. He was a jeweler from Macon, and he and his wife Nita were just as good as you could expect. He was one of our candidates. Another one of our candidates was Harry Geisinger, who was the minority whip in the Georgia House. A third one was George Langford, who was a county commissioner in Cobb County, and then Bill Coolidge, a county commissioner from DeKalb County. Then the colonel
Harold Dye.
Harold Dye was the 5th candidate. All of them were different personalities.
Sure.
But Ronnie was able to come in. By this time, Ronnie's personality had changed. Ronnie was a close friend of mine back in the 60s and early 70s. But he had changed when he got to be the mayor of Macon. He had changed. His personality, his outlook had changed. The people with him were changed totally and completely. And plus the fact that he had an airplane accident, and many people thought that head accident had caused him some problems there too. When the plane landed, something caught him in the head, and he was hospitalized. But he got on the stump, and he was more like George Wallace. And he was, plus the fact, we've always known that in politics, even to this day, we tell possible candidates, like the guys from Savannah who are running for office, you realize that 60% of the vote is Macon North. Well, Ronnie just happened to be there in Macon, where he got all the publicity north, plus he was able to get a lot of the rural support. So he was able to beat Dye in a runoff. It had come down to the two of them, and he was able to beat Dye because, number one, Dye was not a politician. He was an Army officer. and he had never been in politics. There was a general here at Fort Mac, and he had been his aide, and the general had some dealings politically. I can't remember his name, but that's the way Dye got involved. So Dye got in, but he didn't know how to organize as well. He didn't know the people. Ronnie did, and he picked up a lot of support with people up here. The real hardcore Republicans that had backed Goldwater and such. So that was the way he was able to win that race.
I was reading in the newspapers from back then. Ronnie Thompson accused you and the state party of working against him, that you didn't really support his campaign for governor. Was there any truth in that?
No, a lot of them weren't, but he was mad because we'd even sung together a lot of times in times past. He and Nita and I were real close.
I'm going to go ahead and pause it.
But I think Ronnie probably thought that I was going to be, as state chairman, that I was going to step in there and help throw the election to him. But I was not about to get in there and pull against these other people. Harry Geisinger was almost a brother to me. Harry and I were much closer than Ronnie and I wasn't going to go in there and try to cut them apart. George Langford was close. They were all close to me. And so I had the party staying out of it. And I guess Ronnie kind of got mad about that, but he'd make those charges, and we'd get off together at some meeting, and he'd same old us as before, but it was just what he had to do to keep himself going, he thought. But I didn't. But he did cause a situation to happen on election night.
Yeah.
I went into a room where his people were, and there were some people there that when I came in the room wanted me out, and they came over there and said something to me, and one of them tried to slap at me, and it ended up I got cut right here.
I remember seeing this picture in the newspaper.
They thought I'd gotten cut. Well, the woman here from Fulton County, bless her heart, could I remember her name, had on a big old ring.
Is it the Dorothy Felton?
No, it wasn't Dorothy. No, it was the woman that was the treasurer of the party. Oh. But when she came, when they came over there, she grabbed right there, and when they hit it, her ring hit my head. Well, it started bleeding. I didn't do anything. Don't let it bleed. Let it bleed. I was going to let it show. They just scratched, but it got all the press that Ronnie's folks attacked me.
I'm glad you cleared that up.
Oh, we laughed about that ever since, about Ronnie getting blamed for attacking me. And it was, bless her heart, I love her if I could remember her name. She's dead now.
What was it like trying to pick up the pieces after '74? Like you said, Nixon had been popular. The party had been growing, but I mean, just not just losing the governor's race and the lieutenant governor's race with John Savage, I think was the candidate, but a number of representatives and state senators. What was it like trying to explain that to the party of what had happened and what you were going to do?
Well, when I was first elected, I already realized the value of having people working as your field men, because I had done it here in Fulton County with people. So I got each one of the congressional districts together, and I told them that now I want your congressional district to start raising money from all the counties that's within you. Mattingly was chairman down in the 3rd district, and we had 9 districts at that time. And I said, I want y'all to hire these field men to come on board. Y'all pay them, and let them work in your district and go out to the counties that are in your area and start organizing it, getting the folks that are already elected, show them how to do it and how to go about enlarging it. Counties that don't have anybody elected as our county officers, get them organized, and let's start putting this thing together and organizing. Well, we had that going, and so I already had that going. Even when we lost that race, we still had those field men, and they were still organizing. It's still coming back strong, and that's the reason it didn't take us as long to regrow it, where we'd lost, because we had those people. Now, it did disenchant some of our people, and after that, after I went out in 75, they begun to let those guys go. It was too much of a burden for them to raise the money to pay them, because I had them paying them, the guys back then, about $500 a week or something, and their expenses to go out and do this. And Richard McBride was working for me at the state, and he was supervising them all. So we had a lot going, and until Mattingly came along, and they didn't. He could raise the money down in the third, but they weren't all excited about it. So the district chairman kind of dropped the ball, and they didn't keep them going. So they had to start depending on lay labor again.
You mentioned Mattingly. He launched a challenge to your reelection as state chairman in '75. Tell me about how that chairman showdown shaped up.
He was one of my vice chairmen, and we worked very closely together. And I remember we had, I think probably in March or April of that year or something, we had Bob Dole, or one of the biggies down here for speaking, and when they finished, Mattingly kept saying, "Let me get up here and tell them. Let me get up here and tell them I'm supporting you. I'm not running against you." And I said, "No, wait a minute. If they think you're running against me, let them think it. That'll keep somebody else from running, and we'll just go back in and take over like we have before." Because he was with me all 3 terms I was in there. But toward the end, some of the other guys that begun to think, there was the philosophy that I was so close to Nixon. Even in the press, I was called Mr. GOP of the South, and I was Nixon's man of the South. That we had to break. Even Newt, my big buddy, Nick, he got off. He said, "Bob, you have done more as state chairman than any other chairman we've had in the state. But we've got to change the image of the party, and we can if you'll just step down and let us put somebody else in there, then next year you could step back in and run for national committee man, and there wouldn't be a soul that would ever attack you." And I said, "No, if I can do that, I don't see the need of me just stepping aside for somebody else right now." So I didn't do it. Can we turn this off just a second?
Sure. So Mac Mattingly, who had been your vice chairman, succeeds you as party chairman. Now, did you stay active in the Republican Party?
Yes, I stayed active, and then by the end of that decade, I had been reelected to the chairman of Fulton County again. And
what was it like coming back to the county party?
It was fine. That I'd so much when I was state chairman and commingling with the county party. It was just all one operation. So it was just like stepping from one room to the next. And so I did that, and then a bunch of the young people had gotten together, and they were going to really start doing something in politics. One of them was John Oxendine, and another was Craig Swall, David Schaefer. I can't remember all the rest of them, but they were getting together, organizing these new Turks that were going to come in and start moving the party. And they told Swall, said, "Now you've got to become the chairman of the Fulton County party." He said, "I don't know anything about it. I've never even been to a meeting." They said, "We're going to introduce you to the fellow that can show you." So they brought him over and introduced him and asked me. I knew some of them. I just had not met Swall, but we started to organizing, and I was telling him what the job was all about and so forth. Well, as it turned out, the current county chairman, John Sowers, put me on the nominating committee. And my next door neighbor was another one of the members. There were just 5 of us, and another one of the members, and I got along great. So when it came time to nominate, I put Craig up, and we nominated him, and the other candidate was supposed to win backed out. So Swall took it and started to helping him, and then Billy Lovett was state chairman and wanted Swall to run for Public Service Commission. So they said, "Well, we don't want to do it unless you'll come back and be the county chairman." So this was in the early 1900s. So I came back and took it then and was reelected. And then I think either in 1999 or 2000, I just stepped out for good and became the chairman emeritus of the party.
So you have such a long breadth of career.
You did turn us back on, didn't you?
Yes. What were some of the primary factors? You've mentioned the 1980s and 1990s. What were the major factors that enabled the Georgia Republican Party to go from sort of the desperate minority from the 1970s to the majority party in Georgia?
Becoming known, having an organization. You can't win as long as you're that group with 21, 22, 23 counties, and the other 159 counties are all operating against you. You've got to be able to get in them. So organization was part of it. Now, when we begun to start electing people to Congress and so forth, and later to governor, it was much easier to start organizing then because people listened to you, and you could start getting the word out. But as long as we weren't organized, the media is not going to help us. They never have, and they never will. So consequently, we have to do all of the educating ourselves. So we had a lot of mine. When I was state chairman, we didn't have the local elected officials in sufficiency, but in with Harry and the others in Washington, I was able to pull in a lot of big name speakers down here. I wish I could remember all the ones that I had, but I was pulling them down, and people wanting to meet them, so they were coming to get together with them. And the more they got to rub elbows with those people, the more they begun to want to know more about what they were standing for. And so that was the way we started educating our people.
How important were the shifting demographics and population growth in fueling sort of the rise of the Republican Party? here in Georgia?
It's been interesting to see the change. When I came in to politics, Fulton County was the county that raised all the money and produced all of the voters. DeKalb was doing a second, but Fulton was the heartbeat of the party. But little by little, people begun to move out of Fulton. We had a period that was called the White Flight back in the 50s and 60s, where many of the whites moved from here to Cobb, to Cherokee, to all the other counties. Mm-hmm. And little by little, we've gotten around to where the Republicans are the minority, and we haven't carried the county in ages. We've been able to raise a lot of money from here, but then there are other counties who have produced more money than we have. So those demographics have been, while we have grown in other counties, the more our people move to other counties, the better chance we have of teaching them and in raising new Republicans in that area, cultivating them. But then that left Fulton high and dry, and we still do good, but we can produce people, but not in sufficiency to get elected.
You were still involved in the early 90s. How important, or actually, just tell me about the inclusion of the so-called Christian right, the religious right. With Pat Robertson supporters in 1988, with the sort of the rise of the abortion issue, same-sex marriage as an issue, and what it meant for the party with the influx of social and cultural conservatives during that time.
I came from a Christian home and have been involved in church all my life. I've been musically inclined and started singing when I was just a small boy, and consequently have been in church music for all my life, and was minister of music and worship at my church for 58 years. So I came from that type of a situation, not the part that's so bent on it that they can only see one issue. But that's the problem. I didn't get, in my religious experience, I didn't get in that part to where it was one issue and one issue alone, and if you don't follow this, you're going to hell. That was the problem with Pat Robertson and them. They got a few issues, and if you didn't follow that, you couldn't be a part of it. They didn't, so many of the church people never went with him, and the other leaders of organizations like that. He had good ideas, and they came on board, and secondly, they didn't know what they were doing. When they came to our conventions, they didn't know how they operated. So consequently, when they got in there, it was very easy to just manipulate around and start the elections and nominating people, and nominate 4 of yours and maybe one of their friends, and they figured they were getting recognized, and when you got through, you had all your people and they had nothing, and they couldn't figure it out till after the election was over. So they were ill-equipped, number one, and they were too much inclined to go with one issue, and that's not sufficient. You got to, the gospel itself, you can't just take one issue and that's it. There's the whole gospel that you got to grasp. So they were not, and they were not able to get the grassroots and what all they needed in numbers and so forth.
During the mid-90s, somebody who rose to prominence in the party, filling your shoes as state chairman was Rusty Paul. Tell me about watching now Mayor Paul, his career in the Republican Party, and what he did, or your assessment of his administration during what was a really critical period for the Republican Party of Georgia there in the mid to late 1990s.
One of our heydays. Rusty's real close. I have a number of, since I didn't have any sons of my own, there are a number of younger Republican leaders that I've kind of adopted, and he's one of my adopted sons. Rusty came from Oneonta, Alabama. His folks do some farming over there, and he still has a farm in Oneonta. But he was up in Avondale, in that area, after he got out of school, and he was up there working, and he worked for the state party. He learned in school, he did journalism and such, and he was writing for the state party. But somehow or other, when Reagan was elected, Jack Kemp was head of HUD, and Kemp hired Rusty to come up and be his associate. So he was there for a good long while. Well, when he came back here, and we begun to realize our old buddy had really acquired the knowledge and the ability, we begun to push him, and I begun to push him hard to run for state chairman. And finally he agreed to. And Matthew Patton and I co-chaired his campaign. And when he ran, there were 5 people running against him. Don Balfour was one of them. Mike, the fellow that headed up the Christian Coalition, his son is still active.
Brant Frost.
Brant Frost was
fourth.
running, yes. He was running. A number of others were running at that time, and we started the campaign having, each time we'd have an election, Rusty would still be one of the top vote getters, so we dropped the others, got on down to the 2 where he was running from the chairman from Rockdale County, and we were able to get him elected. And he knew immediately. He had been involved in Washington. He knew immediately how to start organizing. He got Kathy Miller, who's now in Johnny Isaacson's office, and others that he put in. He's had people that are like John Watson, who's now
the current
state chairman, worked for him. I can't even remember the different ones that started out working for Rusty, and now they've branched out, heading up stuff in the party all over the country. But he just knew how to get there. Plus, he's another one of those that didn't come from the money set. He knows how to talk to everybody. Plus, he's a singer also. And he put together this singing chairman with he and Matt Patton and me and several others. And so we traveled the state, and he was able to put the party back together. He was the man that Eva Golumbos called on most of the time to give her advice and counsel while she was building the City of Sandy Springs organization. And when she finally won, I told her, I said, Eva, you don't have to do without his services. Why don't you talk him into running for one of your council seats? She did, so she got him on there with her. And then after 2 terms, she decided that she would step down, and he was the one she wanted to go. So that was a walk-in for him there. He had other notions. When he went for the state senate, he and Tom Price were in the same time, and they were both real show horses down there. So the Democrats reportioned and put them in the same district. Well, Rusty knew that Tom wanted to run for Congress. Rusty hadn't thought about running for Congress. He really thought about running for statewide office. But when Tom was so passionate about it, Rusty said, well, he's more passionate about that. I'm going to step aside and let him have the seat, and instead of running against him. So he happened to get reelected. Next thing you know, Tom's runs for Congress, and he wins that seat. And then, but then the thing for the mayor came along. We had talked when I got out of my consulting business and banking in 2002. Rusty wouldn't let me retire. He brought me in with him, and we talked many times about the offices that he should seek or would seek, and it just didn't seem to work out the way we planned it. But now that he's mayor, he's fine and he's doing a good job, and I guess he'll just have to be happy being the mayor of Sandy Springs.
Well, you mentioned another name that jogged my memory, Matt Patton. He had chaired Gerald Ford's campaign in 1976, and then 4 years later becomes big Ronald Reagan. I believe he was chairman of Ronald Reagan's campaign here in Georgia.
He was state chairman while Reagan was running.
Tell me about Matt Patton and his career in the party.
Matt came along. He was an attorney, and a great attorney. And he was. I remember him working in the races way back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. He and his first wife, and he was a real go-getter. And he later became the 5th Congressional District Chairman of the party. And from there, went on and ran for state chairman. We got him elected there. But somehow or other, the Reagan people didn't feel that he should be there. And they went against him after his first term, and then later he had to run against Ellett Pointerman, and I was helping him with his campaign at that time, and he came along well, but Alex beat him, and so that took away his chance of being the state chairman again. I thought he did a good job as state chairman, but it was the fact that he was not backing. It wasn't his way he thought. It was just he was not backing the people that they thought he should. So it was that anger caused him to get votes in the party to move him away. But he settled down to just practicing law and just going to an occasional party meeting and giving money and so forth. But he's never blossomed into the leader he could have been had they allowed him to stay in the leadership position.
Sort of fast forwarding back to contemporary politics, a lot of people, when you look at the different gubernatorial administrations, especially more recently since the 70s, George Busbee, Joe Frank Harris. Now that Georgia's had 2 Republican governors, Sonny Perdue and Nathan Deal, some people have argued, political scientists, historians, that there's not really a whole lot of difference in the way those Republican governors have led the state versus how those old conservative Democrats ran the state. Is there a difference? Is there a distinction that you would make as a former Republican chairman, that there is difference, or there's a nuance to the understanding?
They were not Republican.
The old Democrats.
Sonny was a Democrat when on the floor down there when Rusty was leading him over to switching parties. Nathan Deal was in Congress for 18 years before he decided to switch to the party and become a candidate. So they both came from elected offices as a lifelong Democrat, where they'd spent many, many years there, coming over to us. So then as they did, they have to learn, well, how do we do this? Our present governor, who's a Nathan Deal, is just, he's good as gold. I love him and couldn't find a better one. But 4 years ago, Sue Everhart was our state chairman. And I loved Sue. I helped bring her into the party years ago. But she had served 2 terms as state chairman. They didn't want her to be chairman. They felt that she should be out, and he had another candidate he wanted. And he and his wife and his chief of staff had themselves elected as delegates, and they went to the convention, and he did something that nobody's ever done before. The governor was on the floor with his wife and his chief of staff, and they were campaigning for the other people. And people like my grandson and me and others are backing our incumbent. And then when Sue won, that was a kind of a blow to them. They were not aware. They're not used to being part of the party where the governor doesn't tell the party what to do. So they've learned, but they've learned well. They've learned how to be good Republicans, and he has now, maybe more so than Sonny. But they had to learn how to do it, and in the length of time they serve, you can't get the background that you really need to be a dyed-in-the-wool Republican.
What would you say the different factions or interests within the Republican Party of Georgia are today? We talked about how there was a Callaway faction and a anti-Callaway faction. Are there similar factions, or is it divided on different issues or policies? What is it?
I'd have to think on that one again too. When Trump started running, many of the people who were conservative got behind him and begun to feel that this was the man. You had others that in the party that went along with Newt and with a lot of the other candidates, we've got so many of them now who become popular. It's easy to become. Sometimes instead of being just a flat Republican, you're a Reagan Republican, or I'm a Bush Republican, or I'm a this Republican or that Republican. Is who you're aligning yourself with somebody, and as a consequence, get that cohesiveness that you need to win. You worry about, will we have it? Now that Trump's got in there, I tried to make folks understand that Trump, if you look at Teddy Roosevelt history, you can see that Teddy Roosevelt was a guy people hated. They wanted to get rid of him. That's the reason they made him vice president. He realized that he was being shafted.
Yeah, Roscoe Conkling.
Well, when he was in office, he was off hunting in the mountains. It took him 3 days to get him down so he could be sworn in after McKinley was killed. But then when he got started, he became one of our best presidents, and folks just went crazy over him. And I said, if you'll give him a chance, this guy can do the same thing for us. He's not a politician, but he's a businessman. He's been very successful. He knows business, and he's dealing with the world, and give him a chance and you'll be happy. Well, That may be the case, but the thing is that you've got so many people that in the Democrat circle, the blacks will never accept Trump because they were for Obama, and he has lambasted Obama, and you had that faction and the Clinton faction in the Democrat Party. They're fighting themselves, but then the other people that were all for them. But you've got those two factions fighting one another. They will never accept Trump. He is not their type people. This group controls the media. So the media is following them, and the media who has quit being the media and starts just repeating what everybody else is saying, they are going to work against him. You're going to have a hard time ever trying to get the media back, and so Trump's going to have a hard time. But little by little, as he keeps on with his policies now and what he's doing, he's gaining ground, and little by little, I think, with enough time, he'll be as popular as Reagan and Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, time will tell. Well, when we're looking at the Georgia party, Republicans have been in power in the governor's mansion since 2003, the legislature since 2004, 2005. What's the biggest risk to the Republican majority in Georgia?
Between our party people?
Or the Democratic Party of Georgia making a comeback. What could imperil the Republicans as the governing party here in Georgia?
It won't be the Democrats, because the Democrats have gotten down now in Georgia where the biggest element in the Democrat Party are blacks. They control the party, and they're going to have a hard time ever putting it back and getting cohesiveness with other elements of the party to make them the majority and take over again. The biggest problem we'll have is with our own people. We've got people in the party who are interested in seeing Obamacare killed, this being knocked out, and rather they haven't been all that cohesive about saying we're going to take this bunch of legislation and we're going to go with it. There's a few real important bills they're looking for. If they don't get it, then they fight one another. We're fighting one another now. Look what happened with Obamacare. We should have easily been able to muster 52 votes and carry the new plan across. We've been promising it for years. I remember when Rusty and I were talking with Tom Price back in 2010, we were telling him then, Tom, y'all have just been a total flop. You went in there, you were going to do all these changes, and y'all have spent more money than the Democrats have. And he said, I know it, we know it. When we get another chance, we're going to change things. Well, they came along and they took over, but here we are when it got to time for Obamacare, when it gets to the other bills that he's pushing, his budget and so forth. We can't get the cohesiveness of our people. They come in now. Look at the different elements within the party. The victory. This bunch of guys said we're the freedom group. Listen, we're the victory group. They got a 40 or 50 over here, 40, 50 over here, and we build. Our problem was fighting among ourselves.
Do you think that's as much a problem in Washington as it is in Atlanta or under the Gold Dome or
more
within?
so? The problem in Washington, there was a time that I was totally against term limits, but I think probably right now we should have gone to term limits some time ago. Some of these guys get in there, and that's all they've ever known, is being elected official, serving in Washington. they don't know what's going on outside of town. And so consequently, when they come along, you've got those guys that's been entrenched 30, 40 years and so forth, and they're not going to buy Trump. They're not going to go along with the bills that he wants passed because they want it their way. They still want to control their, when they go in, they used to making $100,000 a year, and soon they're making more than that. Most of them got big bank accounts, big money for retirement, and they don't want to give it up. It's like being an officer in a corporation. So that element is hurting us, as well as the other elements who get caught up in causes.
Are there any issues anymore that Democrats and Republicans here in Georgia can work together in a bipartisan fashion?
In Georgia?
Mm-hmm. It's not a very hopeful sign.
At the moment, I'm caught off guard. I can't really think right now of how we and the Democrats could get together and go for anything in Georgia. We're still nobody wants to give up. If you go to being cohesive, somebody's got to give and somebody's got to take. Nobody wants to give what they've already got.
Since we've already talked about President Trump, there was a very hotly contested special election to fill former Congressman Tom Price's seat between John Ossoff, sort of a newcomer Democrat, and a whole field of Republicans, but eventually Karen Handel. The closeness of that race and the amount of money spent in that race, do you think that was purely a reaction to Donald Trump's election, or do you think that was possibly a sign of sort of maybe the demographic and political changes afoot here in Metro Atlanta?
The Democrats are trying as hard as they can to regroup and come back and be a force that can be reasoned with. They haven't done it. All the money that came in from Ossoff came from out of state. They were trying to put somebody in there that looked good and would campaign good. They can't have a doofus, so they got somebody that comes along, and then they dump all this money behind him. They're trying to buy a position to show the rest of the nation, we're coming back. It didn't work. Now, they're eventually going to realize they are not going to be able to buy themselves back into prominence. They've got to earn it. They've got to come in with us. You can't expect a large element of people who are continuously looking for government to give them something, whether it be black, white, Asian, whatever. You can't expect that type group to come along and have any cohesion with people who feel differently, that feel that government should do as little for us as possible. Now, we're still every issue that comes up, when they start talking about the tax bill now, and they say something about, 50% of the people are not going to pay any taxes at all. They don't think anything about it. They never talk about that. They talk about every time we try to do a bill, we're trying to give a tax break to the one percenters they keep talking about. Who's paying the taxes in America? The people, the one percenters are paying 32% of the tax bill, if not more already. And when you get that, and you come down here, think of all those people that are paying nothing. Now, once again, we say we're not for socialism, we're not for communism, but that's not what we practice. We got folks that say they want to stay a conservative government, but they love this idea of getting some for nothing. And more people are that way every day. And our young people may be taught that. Some of my own grandchildren are that way. They're getting everything, and the more they get, the less they appreciate it. So everybody's looking for a handout, and as long as you're doing it politically, we're not going to ever be cohesive again.
So we've got big elections coming up for governor. Give me your assessment of the field. Well, let's start with the opposite party, the Democratic Party. You've got Stacey Abrams, the former House Minority Leader, and Stacey Evans, former state representative from Cobb County. Where do you see that primary race shaping up?
You got a few people out here that you're dividing. So you got a small group of people that you're dividing. They're not going anywhere statewide.
You don't think the Democratic Party is going to have much of a shot?
Democrat Party is almost dead as far as I'm concerned in Georgia. And that's sad. That's sad. It doesn't need to be a one-party system. It was not good when we were the minority and they had the majority. There needs to be at least two parties so that you can get both sides of it. But it's not that way anymore.
So on the Republican side, got Casey Cagle, Lieutenant Governor since 2007. My fellow Athenian, Brian Kemp, Secretary of State. Your former state senator, Hunter Hill. State Senator Mike Williams. And then another fellow, Clay Tippins, a businessman, entrepreneur. You said earlier that you were supporting Hunter Hill.
I'm leaning toward Hunter now because this guy has proven to me he is not a politician. He was an Army man, a West Point man. His general wrote a letter about him saying that he was the best captain in the United States Army. Now, when you got a guy like that, that's somebody you got to write home about. Now, Casey's a good friend. They both are, and I've talked to both of them, and I guess they both think, because I've never said I've written a check or whatever, that I'm going to support them, and it may shock them when I end up, if I come out and endorse Hunter, which I haven't done at this point, even just talking to him and talking to him. But when we went to the state convention last year in Augusta, the candidates for governor were going up there and speaking, and I was sitting there with the Fulton County delegation, and as they were all half asleep, and everybody was half asleep when the speeches started, when they got through, they were still half asleep until Hunter Hill came along. And when he did, the place came alive, and I'm telling you, they lit up like a Christmas tree. And I thought right there, now this guy's got something to sell. These folks are going for him. He's not an old line politician that just been around. You know, one of my best friends was Zell Miller. He was the executive director of the Democrat Party when I was chairman of the Republican Party. We worked together very closely many of those years ago, and he's still a great friend. But I forgot what I was fixing to tell you about him now. he went on to become lieutenant governor for 16 years?
Yep.
And was there a long time, and he just happened when he got to be governor. They loved him when he got to be governor. But I've forgotten now when that phone is what all I was getting to. But the ones that we got now, our people running are not exciting to me, and I don't know that they're going to be exciting to the public enough for the folks to say they're really going after that one. They're divided up. Now, the two people over here with the Democrats, they can go for either Stacey. They want to. They're just going to take their small number and go that direction and that direction. I don't know whether they'll ever get them back together in the general election. Mm-hmm. But over here, it's going to be a fight to see whether the lieutenant governor or the secretary of state is going to be able to pull it out. The two state senators I don't know that they impress anybody. The times I've been around them, they haven't been very impressive. The only ones that really impressed me is Hunter. Now that's my personal feeling, but and I'm not going to enough of the meetings to know who's showing up with other people or not. But that's my take on it now.
What are the key issues that motivate, energize Georgia Republicans that are really going to be the defining issues of the present and the future?
The state likes the idea that we're the number one state in the nation in which to do business. They like it when our technology, we're becoming the Napa Valley or Silicon Valley over here in Georgia, in Alpharetta. We're pulling in Fortune 500 companies into here and may have the chance of even putting up even more. The more they see of us, our universities are becoming top notch. We have great things going for us. Now people get disgusted with traffic. They get disgusted with taxes and things of that nature. They always have and always will, and they'll argue about that consistently. But right now, the things that are pushing us, and the fact that the states got money, the states makes money. Where there's plenty in the treasury. We don't have to worry about not being able to make our paychecks in the state or do all the things that they want. One of the things that's going to be this bad in Atlanta and in the state is traffic. Somebody is going to have to, instead of worrying about raising money for a campaign, going to have to start coming up with ideas about what do you do with traffic. I keep impressing that on my adopted son, Rusty. Boy, you got to do something right quick. Folks are going to get tired of running around here with all these traffic jams in Sandy Springs. I know you didn't birth it, but it fell in your lap, and you're going to have to come up with some kind of good ideas. And they are. He's done a lot of things. He hadn't publicized it enough, but the taxes and the traffic and the living conditions. Now we're housing. When the economy is so good, then the cost of housing keeps creeping up because nobody wants just a one bathroom house anymore, 2 bedrooms. They want this, they've seen this, they've seen the other, they've seen all the TV and all the other gadgets, and I want it too. I don't care whether you got it. The reason we got so much crime, we got a good bit of unemployment, but everybody's wanting what they see everybody else getting. So if they don't have enough gumption about them to get a job and work, or go to school and learn how to work, they'll go steal it from you and or kill you and take yours. So folks want to enjoy life, so they're looking for that, plus good traffic and good cars and so forth. So it's just a matter of being jealous of somebody else and wanting what they got and getting it the easy way we can. The government do it or give me a job so I can earn it.
When you look towards the future, 10, 20 years down the road, what does the Republican Party look like? What does its ideology look like or feel like, if you have to think that far out into the future? You've seen the party change over the years. Where do you think it's going?
I don't know. I talk to people a lot about worrying about what the world's going to be like for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. The type of the world that I came up in, from the Depression and all the things that's happened, the world wars and the so forth, and the more we go, I fear that what we're lining ourselves up for is getting caught up more in socialism, in folks expecting, even Republicans, expecting more and more from the government. And if the government can't produce it, then whoever stands up and yells the loudest. You remember when Obama was running, everybody said he's going to give us all telephones. And where's my telephone? You want, where's my telephone? Where's this, that, and the other? Where is this coming along? Why am I having to pay for my health insurance? The government ought to be paying for my insurance. They do it in Australia. They do it in Canada. They do it in England. Why can't they do it here? They don't realize that that what they're getting for their money in those countries is certainly not equal to what we're getting here. But the government is being required to produce more and more. And if you're not doing it, and somebody else yells, "Put us in and we'll get it for you," and there'll always be those type that will come up and do that. They'll elect anybody, and the more they do, the more the government sinks and weakens. And I'm afraid that we're headed to societies where we no longer get that deal. You're in America. You can work for whatever you dream for. You work hard enough and dream hard enough, and you can get it. Why should I do it? They're not doing it over there. They're somehow or other they got it over in that house next door. Why should I have to do it? And I'm afraid we're going to change the philosophy in which we live, and we're going to expect more and more with less effort on our part. And I'm afraid we're going to disintegrate from what we've known in the past. And how long has there ever been another nation, a democrat process that's lived as long as we have? How long has it been? Most countries like ours have disintegrated even before now. And it's because we expect too much and give too little. People won't take on responsibilities.
Well, I don't want to end it on such a dark, heavy note. Trying to think of is there anything that does give you some hope?
I'm hopeful that the bills that the president is looking for are gonna, and the other actions, I'm hoping that we can get rid of ISIS. I'm hoping that he can quell the movement of Iran North Korea in atomic warfare, and that he can get things back to where we are a society that accepts one another, that we're not always trying to fight somebody and be trying to climb up one another's back, more accepting. Of course, I don't guess that's really going to happen until Christ comes back. That's the type world we know that will eventually succeed. I wish we could have that type of society now, but I don't know that we can. And the more I look at it, I just see it as we're going down a long road, and I can't see down that way, and I'm worried about what it's going to be like.
Well, it's sort of unfair to ask anybody to predict the future too far out in advance. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add for posterity?
Well, I'm just glad to have been born in America. I'm glad to have been born in America, and I'm glad to be a Christian. I'm glad to be instilled with the genes and the leadership from my father and mother that told me if you want it, you go get it. Well, I know what it's, as I said before, I know what it's like to be raised with wearing some clothes that's been worn by 3 others before you and never be embarrassed about it, but knowing if I want better, I can go get it, and if I don't get it, it's my fault. I know what it's like to. My daddy was a one-legged sharecropper and mechanic, and retired owning a service station and so forth. But we were poor, but we were never hungry. We didn't know we were poor. We could look at what everybody else had, but so much everybody else was in the same boat. We were too, but we weren't hungry. We had something to wear. We weren't cold, and yet we knew that if we want to do better, get out there and do it. So I started working as a curb boy when I was 10 years old. I've been working ever since. I'm 88 now, and I'm still working every day. And I don't expect to retire. I think when you retire, you're setting yourselves up to die, because as psychologists tell us, you use what you got or you lose it. So I'm going to use it as long as I got it. And I'm trying to preach the gospel. Everybody else needs to as well. Don't look around for what everybody can give you. What can you honestly go earn for yourself? Then you'll appreciate it more and enjoy it more, and everybody be happy.
Well, Mr. Bob Shaw, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your time with us today on this installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of it.